I became known as a child prodigy who shot 62 for 18 holes at the age of 12, who won a couple of Masters tournaments and soared to number 2 in the world, and who earned the opportunity to compete for his country in Ryder and President Cups, and even the Olympics. No one grows up believing these things are possible, much less a kid from Baghdad, Florida, population 3,800. I've tried to appreciate each and every one of the amazing opportunities that a life playing golf has given me. But even with that appreciation, the truth is that every dream has two sides. When I hit the hook shot out of the woods to help me win the 2012 Masters, I had no idea how it would impact my life. Sure, I had always dreamed of being a Masters champion, but as I said in the post-round interview, that is where the dream stopped. I never thought about what would happen after the last putt dropped, but I quickly realized I was not equipped mentally or emotionally for living my dream in the public eye. I'm not particularly proud of this fact, but it's the truth. I'm a guy who found something he was good at early in life, then pursued it relentlessly with blind faith and no backup plan. When I started having some level of success on the course, I let that go to my head. I am painfully aware that at times I was difficult to be around, and eventually that rightfully earned me a long spell of public distaste, and even rejection. And this is an excerpt from the book we're going to talk about today, Up and Down by Bubba Watson and Don Yeager.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches, and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Greg Young, and you've just heard from Dr. Duncan Simpson. As sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, strategies, and habits that propelled the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields. Each episode represents over 20 hours of our expert analysis, condensing entire autobiographies into concentrated insights. You'll not only gain the collective wisdom of these elite performers, but also access to over 30 years of our professional expertise in sports psychology. So listening to this, you're saving countless hours while accessing the distilled wisdom and proven strategies of the best in their fields. On Performers, we help you connect their life-changing lessons with your personal and professional goals, offering you an accelerated path to personal excellence. Duncan, what are our listeners going to get out of this episode?
They are going to learn about the power of visualization. You're going to discover how visualization techniques can mentally prepare you for challenges, enhance your focus, and execution in critical moments. You're going to gain insights into emotional resilience. You're going to understand how balancing vulnerability with strength is crucial for emotional resilience. And you're going to explore the value of persistence and dedication. So, Greg, a little bit about Bubba Watson and some of his accomplishments. He is a two-time major winner, winning the Masters in 2012 and 2014. He is a 12-time winner on the PGA Tour, a 4-time winner on the European Tour. He played in the Ryder Cup 4 different times for the US. Unfortunately for him, he lost on all 4 occasions, but he did win as a vice captain in 2016. He represented the US at the 2016 Olympics in Brazil. He has over 55 million in career earnings on the PGA, and he now plays on the Live Golf Tour and was paid an approximate 50 million to play with Live. So Greg, Bubba has obviously had a really, really good career and perhaps a Hall of Fame caliber career. He's actually eligible for the Golf Hall of Fame based on his PGA wins and his 2 major wins. But he's certainly not in the conversation as one of the best all time, like some of our other performers. And to be honest, we're both golf fans, and I've never been a big fan of his from what I saw of him on TV and in the press. And I was actually not sure I even wanted to read this book, or did I think that I'd actually enjoy it. However, I really, really appreciate his raw honesty, his ability to talk openly about his flaws and his mistakes. And I think this is a book I would highly recommend to all of our listeners. So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Dad was a natural teacher and a man of high integrity. Instead of long sit-down speeches, he often conveyed important moral lessons in just a couple of sentences. The only thing a poor man has is his word, he told me. Never lie. I don't care how bad the truth is, never lie. Tell the truth. And here's a promise, I will never lie to you. But more important than just saying words, he believed that you had to build trust with people through your actions. And Greg, a little bit about his mum. My mum who grew up the youngest of 9 on a farm in Mississippi, was a cuddler and the more outwardly affectionate parent. Every night as a child, I would go to bed and my dad would say goodnight. Then my mother would come into my room, read me a story as she scratched my back with her long fingernails. They were often stories of athletes exercising courage or tenacity or some other trait that as a young kid could take me through life. I never became much of a reader, and it would not have surprised me if I was diagnosed with a learning disability, but such things were not commonly diagnosed back then. At the same time, I often did a pretty good job of hiding my struggles. She would place me in the stories that she'd read to me. She would say Bubba this and Bubba that, and I would be very interested and memorize everything about the story because I could visualize it. My parents, who were working class people, had always made sacrifices so that I could have the very best. So Greg, we're hearing about Bubba, and he came from a pretty stable upbringing with 2 loving parents, it seems.
It sounds like we're hearing things that are consistent across a few of our other performers here. Apparently, if you just want to be a top-level performer in the US, you have to grow up on a farm. That seems to be route number 1 to the big time. But yeah, we're seeing a supported family. We're seeing clearly love within this household, and that desire to provide, and that often comes with that idea of sacrifice or investment, which we've talked about in a number of different episodes. But I think this just comes across as a relatively typical upbringing for a working class family. There's nothing really that jumps out to me here of particular note. It seems pretty normal, relatively standard, and is going to set him up for success down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk about his hometown here. And as he mentioned, Baghdad, Florida, of all places, 3,800. So Baghdad is a tiny mill town sandwiched between 2 bodies of water, the Blackwater River and Pond Creek in Santa Rosa County, 20 miles from Pensacola. At my house in Baghdad, there were 100-year-old trees spread around our acre lot. Using just one club, I would hit it low to miss a limb or hit it high to get over a limb. I would hit it one way or another, or just to get around a bush, a tree, or an old lawnmower sitting in the grass. I used our above-ground pool as a water hazard. Most people who know me well are aware that I have played hundreds, if not thousands of rounds with just one club. I've used anywhere from a driver to a sandwich. I had already been doing so much of the same around my house. I would say that my mind is my best tool in many walks of life because I'm big on imagining things, seeing possibilities. I learn by watching and listening and doing. The more I practiced with one club, the more skillful I got at imagining different kinds of shots with every club in my bag. I was fortunate to learn the game the way I did. The process of self-discovery was ideal for my learning style. It turbocharged my development and helped my game improve faster than most kids did at their age. So Greg, we're really hearing about variable practice in and around his home.
We are. We haven't really sort of mentioned how he got into golf, but it sounds like a very organic way for him to get into it, right? He's got a little bit of land, and he's got sort of built-in hazards, as it were. I'm sure the people that were lying in the pool were delighted that he was using it as a water hazard. If your golf game's anything to go by, it would be like the real Baghdad, getting shelled with golf balls all the time. But this idea of variable practice, is what he's doing here is he's essentially creating a set of challenges around the property to really develop and help him figure out and experiment what works for him, and can he do this and can he do that. And it sounds like a lot of fun as well, which I think is really important here. He's just trying to explore. He's just trying to get his feet wet with the game. He's just trying to figure out, what can I do given we used this word last week, given the constraints of what it is that's in front of me, whether that's a tree or a pool or a lawnmower. And that really gives them the opportunity to practice in lots and lots of different ways, rather than just standing and beating the same club, the same distance, same trajectory over and over and over again, which we know is how, unfortunately, at times, some golf, particularly with young golfers, begins to develop, and maybe not at the speed that it should.
Yeah, and he talks in the book at length of playing rounds with different clubs and just experimenting and practicing, and he'd just pick one club and he'd go around a whole 18 just practicing with that single club, which again is very different to probably what you see in practice these days. But of course, over time he did develop, and he started to really show some prominence in his game. And he says, I remember the day I became Bubba Watson the golfer, and not just the kid wearing knickers trying to emulate Payne Stewart, my favorite player. I was 13 years old, and it was the last round of the 1992 Divot Derby, the biggest junior golf tournament in the Pensacola area. I shot 71 in both the first and second rounds to take a commanding lead into the last day of the Tanglewood Golf Club at my home course. I'd been playing the Derby and winning my age division every year since I was 8 years old, but on this day, I was going to make a splash that everyone was going to notice. I would end up shooting a bogey-free 10 under par 62 with 10 birdies for a 46-shot victory. Later, after the round, I ran into Boo Weekly, again at the clubhouse. "What did you shoot?" he asked. "62, I said. "What?" he said. I didn't know whether to take Boo's gesture as genuine amazement or shock that I had shot 62. I had not given him or anyone else much reason to believe that I could play that level of golf. I was good for my age, but I hadn't shot 62. But on that day, I did, and suddenly I felt different. I got comfortable with the idea that golf was going to be my future. When people were choosing who they thought would make the tour, I was an unconventional choice. I was a left-hander who played the game very differently than most thought I should. I didn't always play the odds. To some, I was hard-headed and flamboyant, too brash to make safe choices on the golf course. My parents would allow and even encourage me to do things differently simply for the sake of having my own way or to stand out from the rest of the kids. My dad had reached out to a PGA Tour golfer who lived nearby, Joe Durant, for some advice on how to guide my development. Joe is a 4-time PGA Tour winner who had come through the mini tours and had actually won the same Divot Derby years earlier. After watching me hit a few shots, Joe told my dad that he thought I had a gift and that the last thing I needed was someone trying to tell me how to play. Dad was the closest thing I ever had to a teacher, yet his instruction was more homespun wisdom than anything but technical. "Swing hard," he would say, "in case you hit it, and we'll figure it out later." Greg, there is no single path to success, but I love the advice from Joe Durant, which is basically, don't let someone coach away his talent. That's what he's telling his parents.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we do see this quite a lot in sports like golf, which have a very technical component to it, where we get very mechanical, and we for golf basically become swing coaches, right? It moves away from coaching someone how to play golf as opposed to swinging a golf club. Bubba is, I don't want to say naturally talented, because that takes away from the countless, hundreds and thousands of hours that he's had practicing on the property. It's not that he's naturally talented. He has deliberately developed these skills through the variable practice that we've talked about. And I think this is pretty sage advice from Joe Durant to say, hey, don't let anyone touch that golf swing. Just go out there and continue to practice golf.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's a little bit more about this process that he goes through in terms of his development. And he says, in 1991, Payne Stewart won the US Open at Hazeltine in an 18-hole playoff over Scott Simpson. I watched every shot and imagined what it would be like to play on tour. That summer on the putting green in contest with Randall at Tanglewood, I tried to put myself in a frame of mind to win major championships. This 10-foot putt to win the Masters. This 30-foot putt will get me into a playoff at the US Open. I use a lob wedge now almost exclusively around the greens because of how I learned to use that at the putting green. Randall and I made up holes chipping up to the putting green from every conceivable spot. We would start on the first tee box or the flower bed next to the clubhouse. The crazier the made up hole seemed, the better. We let our imaginations run wild. I spent countless hours playing our little made-up holes. If I had grown up on a golf course with a bunch of straight holes and thick high rough, I would not have been able to express my creativity, and I might not have fallen in love with the game. I would probably have not made it to the PGA Tour, and I definitely wouldn't have the shots that I have today. I knew that I could hit the 40-yard hook off the pine straw in the playoff of the 2012 Masters because I've hit shots like that on nearly every hole at Tanglewood. Some golf courses would never give you the chance to practice that shot. Greg, I've used this maxim before, but great performers are great problem solvers. And that's what we're hearing from Bubba. He's practicing every conceivable shot, and he's just being a problem solver.
I love the fact that he's setting his own challenges here, and he's setting his own level of challenge with his pal Randall here. Rather than playing the course exactly how it's designed. Hey, this is the yardage, this is the tee box, this is the flag location. Just going and putting the ball in random spots and saying, hey, can you deal with this? Here's the demands of what we're asking you to do. Can you deal with that? And people are very good at setting that level. They'll set it usually just a little bit higher to make it a challenge. The sort of analogy here that was in my head was horse, the basketball game, where people aren't, if you've got you and your pal, you're not necessarily going to play one-on-one basketball, but you are going to have a game of horse for sure, where how mad can you make something? How random can you make it? How creative can you be in that moment? And I think creating that randomness and that challenge really, it fosters and helps to facilitate that motivation really to keep going. It takes the monotony out of things. It makes things fun. It makes things enjoyable. And, to quote Einstein, creativity is intelligence having fun.
Oh, I like that quote. I've never heard that.
Neither had I. I had to Google it.
Well, of course, he is a teenager, so he is having to go to school. But after his 62, as he mentioned, for me, it became all or nothing. I began telling my school teachers that grades didn't matter because I was going to be a professional golfer. I think that's the reason why I had so many naysayers, because I had such a stubborn belief in myself. When people asked, what happens if your plan doesn't work? I would say, it's going to work. There is no other option. My dad used to always say, you've got to be a leader or a follower, and you don't want to be a follower. He knew me better than I knew myself. Bubba, you have two options, he would say. You got to be really smart or really good at sports, and you're not smart.
Some fatherly advice right there, isn't it?
So you better be really good at sports. That's great. He didn't say it in a negative way. That's just my dad's way of firing me up. I had just shot in the 60s for the first time in a tournament without a bogey. That was a number only professionals shot. I felt like I'd grown up. I had found my spot and my sport. From that moment forward, I was obsessed with being a golfer. There was no backup plan. My attitude towards school wasn't helped by the fact that by high school, I was already envisioning a career in golf and boldly proclaiming it to others. That didn't sit well with everyone. One teacher actually told my mom that I was not going to amount to anything. After being offended, Mom decided to turn this into a chip I would carry on my shoulder for a very long time. I guess you're going to have to show her differently, she told me. So Greg, an idea that came to mind when I read that paragraph was the concept of burn the boats. And this phrase, for those that are not familiar, kind of dates back to a Spanish expedition led by Hernan Cortez when he landed in Mexico. And the idea was that when he landed, he wanted his crew so committed to their expedition and journey ahead that he made them turn around and burn the boats so that they had only one path forward. And I feel for Bubba, he has no other path. Golf has to work out because he's not good at school.
It doesn't sound like he's had a great motivational climate here. He's got teachers that are saying that he's not good enough. His dad's telling him that he's not smart, so you better be good at golf. And I think that this, as we've talked about with other things, comes with a little bit of a shadow side. Yes, you develop that all-in mentality and create that commitment and discipline towards the cause, the goal, the chip on the shoulder that his mother placed there for him, not something driven by himself. But I think we've seen this a lot in young athletes in a number of different sports. And I've definitely heard of this in soccer, where you have young athletes that are told that this is what they're going to do, and they kind of believe it and buy into the narrative. And certainly school and education tend to go to the wayside a little bit. And then they go into the very, very competitive world of sports. And it gets to the point where maybe they haven't quite made the grade and they have nothing left to fall back on. And that is not always a great place, either psychologically or practically, as someone having to go into the workforce, as it were. So there is a little bit of a cautionary tale to be there. This isn't going to work for everyone. But it sounds very much like if he's shooting in the 60s as a very young man and going out there and winning tournaments, that he's in an incredibly strong position here to burn the boats, as it were, that it's not maybe a 50-50 coin flip here. He is in a position to be successful, and he does have the support and the backing of his parents, which is a really, really big deal here.
And I think one of the outcomes of all this kind of unconventional practice, as it were, was he never had an actual golf lesson. Nobody actually taught him how to play golf in a traditional sense. So probably as a result, he developed his own technique. And we're going to hear a little bit about that. And he says, I was an unconventional golfer, even in middle school and high school. If I got in the woods, I wouldn't measure the odds of hitting it out and decide to play it safe and chip it to the fairway. I'd go for it and hammer it out with a lofted club. People thought it's the wrong approach, which meant they saw my game as less safe. That led more than a few folk to predict I wouldn't be successful. In addition to being seen as overly aggressive player, A lot of people thought my technique would eventually limit my development. What they didn't understand is that my technique was nothing more than an effort to work with what I had. I later realized that my golf equipment didn't fit my body. I always had long arms and big hands, and by high school I was swinging pretty hard. The standard size grips on my clubs were way too small for my hands, and the shafts in my clubs were too whippy or flexible for my powerful swing, but I didn't know it back then. The combination of small grips and whippy shafts meant it was a lot easier to hit the ball when I played a massive hook for most of my youth. I never thought of playing that hook as a big deal or a major innovation at the time. However, when I got to college, I began to play equipment that was specifically for me, with larger grips and stiffer shafts. That helped me eventually unlearn a few of the habits I developed back then. For example, after playing a massive hook for most of my youth, by the time I was in my early 20s, I had started playing a slice, curving the ball the other way on nearly every tee shot. But I've always been an instinctive player who had the ability to bring a club around the way I wanted to, whether it was to hit a ball high or to drive it low or bend it. So Greg, you've used the phrase before, necessity is the mother of invention. Due to the clubs that he has, his game develops a certain way.
There's a couple of things that jump out to me here, and this idea of technical ability, or you use the term unconventional technique. For me, technique is revealed or is driven or determined by the tactical demands of what it is that you're trying to do. So I've never been a believer that there is a perfect technique for everything. And when I say tactical demands, what I mean by that is, what are you being asked to do in the moment? So it's a collection of decisions that you have to make and the kind of the challenge that's laid out in front of you. Is it because you have to hit the ball high? You have to hit the ball low? You have to hit the ball from left to right or from right to left? Are you trying to chip a ball that is going to run out or chip a ball that stops very quickly? Technique is very, very much driven by what it is that you're trying to do.
Greg, that was a really great breakdown, and we've got a little bit more from his parents and the role that they played in his development and this kind of unconventional path, or really that idea around technique and strategy. And he says, they still went ahead and followed their own path for helping me grow into the game. When everybody was getting golf lessons, they didn't make me get them just because other people thought that it was the right thing to do. My dad would encourage me to play instead of beating balls on the driving range. On the drive home after every tournament, it was always about what could you take from the experience and what could you improve upon next time. But what I learned most came from watching and listening. The truth is, when you tell the whole world, at least the whole world of Baghdad, that you're going to be a professional golfer, you set yourself up for a lot of negative blowback. And when you remind people, as often as I did through my attitude, that you plan to do it your own way and not take any lessons, for example, or play conservative shots, you invite even more naysayers into ring. That was me. I was about as unconventional as they came, and I was far too proud of it. Greg, I like the saying, stop asking people for directions to places that they've never been. You don't have to listen to everyone else, and you don't have to do the things everyone else is doing because they've never been there before.
That's quite a profound statement. I'm going to repeat that. Stop asking people for directions to places they've never been to. But I think having that guidance and being able to apply it, and maybe seeing it as a yes and. Yes, I can take this information in, figure out what works for me, and then apply it to my performance. Or at least I can consider it and decide whether or not it's right for me. If it's not right for you, you don't have to use it. But I like the idea of trailblazing yourself, but they talk about if you want to go somewhere fast, go there by yourself. If you want to go far, go with other people.
And around the age of 15, Greg, this idea of turning pro is really starting to solidify for himself and his parents. And he said, when I was about 15, we didn't have the money or time to travel to some of the top American Junior Golf Association tournaments. My mum learned about local series that was sponsored by a beer company. Instead of competing against my peers around the country, I went head to head with many of the better adult golfers from the Florida Panhandle. At some point during my senior year in high school, my dad and I developed this vision of me turning pro. But not just turning pro eventually. I was going to turn pro right after I graduated from high school. It wasn't necessarily a good vision. It didn't feel like God's plan for me or anything like that. But we felt like we had a solid plan. We didn't seek the opinions of others we knew or call a family meeting to discuss it. It was based on a pretty simple set of facts. I did not like school and wanted to do nothing else but play golf. And my dad didn't place a whole lot of stock in the value of a college education. So there it was. So Greg, at 15, he's playing head to head with adults instead of being out on the junior circuit. And I think a plan kind of emerges for him to be a pro, but it's not much of a plan though.
But I'd say there is a vision here, not necessarily a plan. There is an aspiration, a desire, an end goal in place. What really stands out to me here is this idea of competing against adults. And I think we've seen that with a couple of other performers as well. Maybe that's playing ever so slightly higher in terms of an age group level or an ability level as well, to push them and drive on and kind of almost test their mettle in certain different arenas to see if they've got what it takes to be able to continue to develop and go on. You know, if you're good enough, you're old enough. It's an old cliche from the football world, but I think it fits pretty well here.
Yeah, and as we said, Bubba and his dad had this vision, but there was someone else in his household who thought a little bit differently. And he says, later, my mum sat me down and said, Bubba, I know you love your golf and I want you to enjoy all the successes in the world with it, but I spoke to your father and you're going to get a college education. End of discussion. So he might have thought one thing.
It sounds very much like father was told, not to, we didn't have a discussion, but he was told.
Yes. So the plan has changed and he's going to get a college education. So around this time, Bubba meets his guidance counselor because now the plan has shifted to college. But she made it very clear that he was actually in serious danger of failing high school and not graduating, although his GPA was 1.9.
1.9 is a handicap that you aspire to, not a GPA.
Exactly. So interestingly enough, at this time, Bubba's a senior. His GPA is obviously not good enough for a 4-year university. I think he can barely graduate from high school. But luckily, he's met a gentleman by the name of Chris Hack, who used to run the American Junior Golf Association back in the day. And Coach Hack is then offered a job at the University of Georgia and wants Bubba to play at Georgia. The problem is Bubba's grades are definitely not good enough for Georgia. But Coach Hack says, look, you spend a couple of years in community college, work in the classroom and on the course, and he's going to save him a scholarship. So if Bubba can get his grades up. So that was all the motivation he needed. So from here, Bubba has to go to a junior college called Faulkner State Community College, which is in Alabama. And of course, they were very happy to take him on the golf team.
Oh, I bet they were.
Interestingly and self-admittedly, he was not a great teammate. He was just so much better than his teammates at Faulkner State Community College. And he says he was very selfish and he didn't want to train with his teammates. Eventually, he makes it to Georgia. Bubba was an All-American in his first year at Georgia, which was his junior year. But despite his successes, his senior year at Georgia was actually really disappointing. Early in the season, Coach Hack told him that he wouldn't be traveling in the team because the other 5 players had really developed a great chemistry. So in other words, Bubba had not developed a chemistry with his teammates and he'd actually ended up alienating himself from his teammates. And he spent most of the season watching his teammates. So Bubba reflects on his experience with Georgia and he says, someone had to sit out and I gave him reasons not to play me. Even though I usually outplayed everyone in practice and beat them at a couple of tournaments where I got to play a 6-man. Part of me wishes I'd been more mature and sat down with my coach and talked it through. Found out why I wasn't playing in my senior year as a preseason All-American. But I don't think I could have handled the answers back then, whatever it was. In the end, I bit my tongue and made a decision I remain proud of to this very day. I stayed on the team. Who knows, if I had not been motivated by being sidelined at UGA, maybe my golf career would have turned out very different. In some ways, the setbacks I faced early on created and fueled my desire to prove everyone wrong. And without that drive, I might have given up on the dream long before reaching the PGA Tour. I like to believe it was just all part of God's plan for me. Greg, I've always thought life has an uncanny ability to give us what we need, not necessarily what we want. And Bubba is definitely getting a taste of perhaps what he needs, not what he wants at Georgia.
Absolutely. It's quite brave from his coach here, to be honest, because he's clearly a very, very talented golfer. I mean, obviously preseason All-American. So I'm actually quite impressed that Coach Hack here has decided to sort of stand by that position and say, hey, listen, chemistry is the most important thing for us here. This is a team sport. It's very important that we've got You know, the 5 or 6 really good players that can go out there and do it collectively as a team. And Bubba, you just don't fit that mold right now, despite your unquestionable level of talent. So I think you're right. This is a lesson that he's going to have to learn, and maybe he doesn't learn it particularly well, but his experience at Faulkner State Community College and then here at UGA is definitely going to have taught him some lessons.
Bubba's now graduated from Georgia and he's playing on the mini tours. And he said, when I was playing the mini tours, I developed a little system designed to give me the greatest possible exposure to competitive tournaments with the least amount of travel. Here's how it worked. Every nationwide event included a Monday qualifying round from which a handful of players with the best scores would be invited to play in the nationwide event. What I'd do is find places where nationwide events and mini tour events were happening at the same time. On Monday, I'd play in the Monday qualifier. If I earned a spot in the nationwide event, great. If not, I would play the mini tour. In this way, I was playing in as many events as I could and getting lots of practice against all kinds of different players and all kinds of different golf courses. For me, getting better at golf and moving up the ladder was never about logging in lots of hours at the driving range. I grew up learning by playing, and that's how I wanted to continue to grow as a professional. If I could make some money while learning, all the better. Greg, the lesson here is obvious for me. Bubba's developing by focusing on playing a lot of golf over just practicing on a range.
He knows what works for him, but for me, it's about considering what playing offers over the range, or vice versa. What does the range offer over playing? So playing gives you a lot of the elements of golf, hitting shots, to course management, to managing the mental game and the demands of where you are in terms of your score. The range is a very stripped back version of golf, very much focused on the technical elements of things. If your goal is to get better at golf in all its facets, play golf. If your goal is to really nail some very fine technical detail, the range is probably a better place to do that. But his goal here is about becoming a better golfer. I would say he's going down the right path here of playing as much golf as he possibly can.
And the other side of it, I love that he just wants to compete, and he's going out and competing against different types of players, different courses. And I think sometimes players are afraid of that competition, but Bubba's just saying, I'm going to play as much as I possibly can. And obviously with a lot of playing, there comes this sliding doors moment, as we've talked about in many of our performers' journeys, and I just love these. The top 20 earners on the money list on the nationwide tour get their PGA card. So if you finish in the top 20, you're gonna get your card for the PGA Tour. So at the end of 2005, Bubba is actually ranked 21st. However, that year, Jason Gore had won 3 times on the nationwide tour, which meant that he actually earned early promotion to the PGA Tour. He went to the PGA Tour and ended up winning a tournament on the PGA Tour through an exemption, which meant that he ended up earning a full PGA membership spot. Because of his win on the PGA Tour, this meant that his spot in that top 20 didn't matter, and everyone shifted up a spot. So instead of being 21st, Bubba becomes the 20th player to earn his card to the PGA Tour. What about that, Greg?
I bet he's never been cheering for another golfer as much as he possibly has when Jason Gore was leading that tournament on the PGA Tour.
Yeah, quite a remarkable little stat there. So as I mentioned, Bubba makes it onto the PGA Tour, and his first tournament at the Sony Open in Honolulu, he actually finishes 4th. And then 6 weeks later, he finishes 3rd at Tucson, Arizona event, and he played the whole event bogey-free. And he didn't win. And this was the first time in 30 years that this had ever happened, that you play a bogey-free tournament and you don't win the tournament.
He had a lot of doubles, a lot of triples, and a lot of quads, though.
You're probably right. That sounds like my golf game.
Exactly does.
So Greg, he's having a lot of early success. He finishes 4th, then he finishes 3rd, and the press really start picking up on who Bubba Watson is. They really start highlighting his long drives, but they're also kind of criticizing the way he's taking golf courses apart. Additionally, he has to get his head around this idea of having a caddy, and he seeks advice from a veteran player called Ben Crane. He says, I had told Crane that while I wanted a caddy who knew the game, it was more important to me that my caddy be at the same place I was in my life. A solid man of faith who loved his family and had the strength of character needed to do a difficult job. And being caddy is a hard job. You have to be part sports psychologist, part mentor, and part friend. Over the years, I've learned that these roles can come into conflict with each other. and only a special person with a strong sense of doing the right thing can manage it. Teddy is a rare person who combines all of the attributes you could ever want in a caddy. He was the first real caddy I ever had, and so far, he's been the only one I've ever had. A 15+ year relationship is fairly rare in professional golf. These relationships are like marriages. You have to maintain them. You have to have hard conversations. You need to begin them from a place of love so that you can be truthful with one another and work through problems. Otherwise, the problem won't go away. As players, we get into places where we can say some hurtful things to our caddies. Greg, golf caddies certainly hold a unique role in sport. They're really unlike any other support staff member that I can think of.
They are really a jack of all trades, and he breaks it down nicely there. You're a friend and a counselor and a psychologist and a strategist and a confidant, as it were. It's a really strange job because at the end of the day, you're just a guy that carries the bag, but you play such an important role in that person's success. And I think any golfer will tell you that the caddy is probably the most important club that they have in the bag.
Yeah, it's a really nice way of putting it. And we're going to hear a lot more about Teddy and his relationship with Bubba as we go on. So, from his rookie season in 2006 until 2010, he entered 106 PGA events and made the final cut in 61 of them. So, pretty good record there. Of these, he managed 13 top 10 finishes and 31 top 25 finishes. He also managed to tie fifth in the 2007 US Open. So, Bubba's really, that first 4 years on tour, he's really having a lot of success. And with that comes this notion of brand and brand Bubba. And we're going to hear a little bit about this concept of brand. And he says, I like to make people laugh and I wanted people to like me. But the truth was, I also wanted to stand out from other golfers, not just as a golfer, but as a person. Golfers thrive not only by playing well and winning, but also by building a personal brand that attracts fans and, along with fans, sponsors. I was building a brand called Bubba from Baghdad, a brash, blue-collar guy who could do things with a golf club most people couldn't, and who most people could relate to. When you do this kind of stuff, you walk a fine line between looking like a goofball and looking like a goofball who can back it up with attitude on the course. I thought I fell into the second category, someone who liked to instill a little humor to diffuse the tension, but who also showed passion and respect for the game. As far as my actual game went, Bubba the brand was attracting attention of fans and professionals alike. Everyone seemed to agree I was a force, someone whose long drives and ability to bully some of the obstacles that bothered other golfers was changing the way the game could be played. Greg, in your experience, how important is it for athletes to consider and even develop a personal brand?
I think while developing a personal brand, it certainly can offer numerous benefits, but it's important to acknowledge that, like most things, it can also pose some risks. So for some athletes, the focus on personal branding and things away from the course or the court or the field certainly can become a distraction, which basically robs attention away from the primary goal of performing at the highest level. And there's a certain pressure to maintain that image or to constantly engage with fans and media. That can be mentally exhausting and even lead to burnout, particularly when you layer that on top of the demands of performance.
That's just a fantastic breakdown there, Greg. And we're going to jump ahead, but still early in his career, he gets the opportunity to practice with Tiger Woods. And this is something that Bubba talks at length on. And I'm just going to kind of bring up a couple of snippets here because I think it's incredibly interesting. And he says, to this day, I'm not 100% sure why Tiger agreed to play those practice rounds with me. I was a pretty young player at the time who had not won on tour, nor had I really done all that much to warrant the attention of an all-time great. At the same time, I believe Tiger is a true golf nerd. I had never met anyone who seemed to love studying the game as much as Tiger, and to some degree I believe he saw my approach to the game as a bit of a novelty and it intrigued him. Not necessarily because of my length, but rather my tendency to curve the ball in the air so much more than anyone else. And Greg, this next section really reminded me of episode 14 where Mark Messier was kind of training every day with Wayne Gretzky and he's seeing an all-time great. And Bubba now has the opportunity to practice with Tiger and learn from Tiger over several rounds. And he says, so we played. And over the course of several rounds, Woods asked me some questions about my swing and how I approach certain shots and a lot of other things. The fact was, he did most of the asking and talking, not because I was in awe of him or didn't think I could learn from him, but because I learned from watching, not talking. I think my lack of questions may have bothered Woods, who may have not realized how much I learned from just being around him, but I chalk it up to different learning styles. He'd grown up with coaches and teachers and developed a highly verbal, interactive style of learning. I was a visual learner who never had golf coaches and learned more slowly. Playing with the big boys was my lifetime goal, and Tiger Woods was the biggest of the bigs. Playing with him taught me that I could stand toe-to-toe with the world's best, which I felt I had done during those practice rounds. I began to realize that when I played with the best, anything was possible. I also began to realize that the true difference between Tiger and everyone else wasn't just the quality of his play, but also his ability to consistently rise to the moment when his very best was needed. Having been on tour for a while, I also gained a strong appreciation for his uncanny ability to post a good score even when he wasn't playing his best. Rather than letting one bad round take him out of a tournament, he managed to salvage a good score for the day and rebound the next day. That was something I knew I had to get better at. One topic I wish I'd thought to ask him more questions about is the mental side of the game. When it came to playing for fun, I felt nobody in the world was better than me. But when it came to playing for serious stakes, with the world watching, I was a boy and Woods was a man. Greg, I know you're not a big fan of learning styles, but there are definite differences here between the way Bubba and Tiger approach their learning and their development.
Absolutely. I think Bubba and Tiger clearly had marked differences in their approaches to their own development. Bubba's approach was more intuitive and self-guided, and he learned by playing and experimenting on the course. And we've already talked about his ability to visualize shots and create those really imaginative scenarios to help him improve his game. And this creative and maybe less conventional method allowed him to develop unique skills and a very, very distinct playing style. But in contrast to that, what we know of Tiger's development is that it was highly structured, very rigorous, very disciplined, particularly under the guidance of his dad. It was very formal coaching from Earl Woods, focused on detailed analysis and constant and consistent refinement of his very, very specific technique. So Tiger's method involved rigorous practice routines and a very strong emphasis on fundamentals, which ultimately helped him achieve a very, very high level of consistency and precision in his game. So those differences, I think, at the very base level, highlight that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to development in sports, and in particular here in golf. Both methods can lead to success, but it's imperative that each athlete finds what works best for them and that they remain true to that process. I love what both athletes are doing here. They're staying true to that process. Tiger's trying to learn from Bubba. Bubba's learning from Tiger. One of the great lines is observation is acceptable theft, and I think that's hugely important here. You go there and you steal the bits that are going to be impactful in your performance.
Yeah, I love that last quote. So as I mentioned, Bubba's thinking about building this brand. On the first 4 years, he hasn't won on tour, but he has had a lot of success. But I think this unconventional style and the way he's going about it is starting to build some negative attention. And he says, during this period, my growing stature as a golfer also led to my greater visibility in the media, which created a whole new and unforeseen set of pressures. Living a life in the public eye is difficult at best. But for me, it was especially tough because I am not mentally or emotionally strong enough to just say, forget it. What do they know? Suddenly, I found myself constantly having to explain myself to everyone. Life has always been pretty good for me off the golf course, but inside the ropes, I can become a head case. A negative, self-absorbed, and self-defeating person in pursuit of an unattainable perfection. No one has ever had to bear this burden more than Teddy. A day earlier, during the 2010 Memorial, several caddies complained to Teddy about my behavior. A couple of them called me a psycho and said that I was distracting their players when I was paired with them. A psycho? That's not what I wanted to be. I didn't want to be a distraction on the course, and I wasn't being kind to Teddy. Seemingly, I had no control over my behavior on the course. He had no doubt that my lack of emotional control on the golf course was holding me back as a golfer, and it frustrated him that I didn't see it too. So Teddy is really struggling with Bubba here, and he sits down to confront him, which I think, Greg, is a really difficult thing for a caddy to do, as obviously Bubba is his employer. And he says, as I sat directly across from him at a high-top table, he told me that if I didn't change, he no longer wanted to work for me. You're not being who you want to be, he told me. You're not even trying. With such a stern rebuke, Teddy believed that he was going to lose his job. To him, I was a prideful know-it-all who wasn't open to learning or change. But what he didn't know fully was that I was in fact open to change. Teddy gets to see me at my most vulnerable place. In the middle of a competitive round, it's not easy to turn on and off your emotions. Moments of joy and disappointment come and go, and I'd always tried to balance those contrasting feelings with jokes and humor on the course. But when something went wrong, I could have a nasty eruption. In my first 4 years on the tour, I'd become famous for my long drives and pink shafts and misbehaving on the golf course. Becoming a celebrity before becoming a tour winner invited scrutiny from fans and media. So, Greg, Bubba's under a lot of pressure here, but he's also acting like a complete arse. But he's being quite honest about it. He's recognizing and he's having some vulnerability, saying, like, I know I'm not the best person to work with.
Clearly, it's about how do you handle yourself when you're under that immense pressure, and I don't think he's doing a great job of it. I think, by his own admission, his behaviour under that pressure is unacceptable, and it's having a negative impact on those people around him, including his caddy. And when you think about Teddy's job is basically to help Bubba play his best possible golf. But I think you've got to meet him halfway there, Bubba, and help him help you, right? Athletes across all different sports, they must recognise that their actions and attitudes can affect the people around them, the entire team and the support network that are all trying to help them be successful. So it's crucial for them to take responsibility for their own behaviour and seek that help when it's needed and have that openness and willingness, as he's mentioned, to change. But more importantly, have a desire and a genuine effort to change. It's not just about having the motivation to change, but it's also about going out there and actually doing it.
So, Greg, 2010 was a big year for Bubba, and he says, in 2010, 5 major things happened. I told my father I loved him. My father died of throat cancer. Angie had her own health scare. I won my first PGA event, and I made the US Ryder Cup team. It was my best year and also my worst. So with regards to his first win, he wins the Travelers, and he says, I beat Verplank with a par to earn my first PGA Tour win. I was relieved and happy to have a 2-year exemption that came with the win, but that paled in comparison to what else it gave me. An opportunity to publicly thank Teddy, who had for 4 years endured my rants on the golf course. As I promised Teddy, I worked on being a better role model. But as is usually the case when someone is attempting a major shift in action, I was inconsistent. Additionally, I wanted to win it for my dad, who is dying of throat cancer. I love you, Dad. That was the first time I publicly shared what my dad had been going through. To appreciate the significance of that moment, you have to understand some of the events leading up to the Travelers Tournament. I went up to the porch and told my dad I loved him. That was the first time either of us had voiced the words, I love you. I was crying and he was holding back his tears, but he told me he loved me too. Greg, he wins the Travelers and it's a very emotional moment for him. Obviously, there's a lot of things that are going on in the background and it's easy to forget, but performers are people too. And it's really important to recognize that we often don't know what's going on behind the scenes when people are acting out and perhaps not behaving at the best. Bubba's going through a lot.
That's very true. And we often see that athletes' triumphs and failures in isolation. For a golfer, we tend to see them from Thursday through Sunday and for maybe 4 or 5 hours a day as they're playing their golf. But there's a ton of stuff that happens away from the golf course. And, because they are people, as all people do, they live complex and multifaceted lives and there's no escaping that. So his reflection here, I think, really underscores the importance of having empathy and understanding and recognizing that every victory and every setback, it really comes with a deeply personal context behind it. There is always a story. And as he said, performers are people too. And the stories that they have are a blend of both their visible achievements that we get to see on the major networks and kind of the HD cameras, as it were, but also the unseen battles that are behind the cameras, away from the lens. And it's very easy often as spectators for us to see these people as just commodities, as robots that go out there and perform, in this case, swing a golf club. But they're not, they're people. It's not that they are golfers, they are people that play golf.
Yeah, beautifully said, to be honest. Quite an emotional part in the book. And in that year in 2010, he also qualifies for the US Ryder Cup team and plays at Celtic Manor in Wales. And it's the last event that his dad actually sees him play before he passes away of throat cancer. And he earns a point for the US in the four balls with Jeff Overton, which was an upset win over Luke Donald and Patrick Harrington. But it was the only point he won, and the Europeans ended up winning the Ryder Cup that year. And jumping ahead, we're going to go to 2012, and it's really all about the first green jacket. And I'm going to go with an idea here, Greg, and I'm not sure. I haven't told you about this, so we're going to see how it goes. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk through his Masters win, and I'd like you to act like his caddy or his mental coach throughout these holes.
Well, the first thing I'd do is negotiate myself 12% of the winnings here. So are we going down? Are we going down that road?
It was Saturday afternoon at the 2012 Masters, and I just finished my third round with a 2 under par 70. Through 54 holes, I was 6 under, 3 shots behind the leader, Peter Hansen, and 2 shots behind Phil Mickelson, who, with a win on Sunday, would claim his 4th green jacket. But now a reporter was standing there asking me if I thought I could win the real tournament. My goal is to get a top 10, I said. I'm just going to go out there and play my game. I awoke on Easter Sunday, the 17th time that the Masters fell on the day when we Christians celebrate the risen Saviour, Jesus Christ. Opening with a bogey wasn't at all what I wanted, and Teddy didn't want me to get in my own head.
So, I'm his caddy here. What I would do, and what I've perhaps done in the past here, is very much ask an athlete, or a golfer in this instance, ask a golfer if he's going to let the first, let's say, 10 or 12 minutes of his performance, that's going to take around 4 hours, dictate or determine what he's going to do for the remaining time that he has. So is he going to allow this first hole to dictate what he's going to do over the next 17 holes, or is he confident in his own ability? Remind him that he's opened rounds of golf before with bogeys, and he's gone on to post good scores. That's probably where I'd start here.
All right, I think I'll let you keep your job for a little bit longer.
Okay.
So
not sacked after the first hole. That's a win for me.
Yeah. So at the Masters, the scoreboard's an integral part of the drama that occurs on a Sunday afternoon in a final round. Both the players and the patrons seem to hold their breath with every turn of these little windows that show the changes on the leaderboard. By the third hole, I saw a scoreboard that revealed that Louis Oosthuizen was in the lead at 10 under par, and I was 4 shots back from him. I told myself to keep grinding, and that if I held it together, I could get a top 10 finish and possibly a top 5. After making a birdie at the 7th hole, I made 6 straight pars. At the short par 3 12th hole, I couldn't get up and down after missing the green and made bogey. I was now 2 strokes back from Louis and needed to give myself another pep talk. I was still in a good position with good birdie chances at the 2 par 5s, the 13th and 15th holes. Since going 1 over on these 2 holes on Thursday, I had birdied each during the ensuing rounds. I was excited because I could make a couple of birdies. I could finish in the top 5, make a boatload of money, then go home and have fun with Angie and Caleb.
So to be perfectly honest, I like where he is here. He's not really focused on winning too much. He's got a clear plan. Ideally, we'll finish in the top 5, but I like the idea of just grinding and keeping your head down, focusing on what you need to be focusing on in that moment.
So on the 15th, he says, at the par 5 15th hole, I hit a drive and made a 2-putt birdie, but still hadn't crossed my mind that I could win. I was so focused on trying to finish in the top 5 or top 10. So Greg, he's made birdie here.
He has, and that could potentially become a distraction. Usually we think about negative things becoming distractions, but this could certainly become a distraction. But he clearly knows what he's focusing on. He's focusing on trying to finish in the top 5 or top 10, and that's where his mind is. Still love this.
So Greg, on the 16th, the famous par 3, says, at the par 3 16th, I hit a perfect 8-iron to within 12 feet of the hole. I remember thinking that if I made that putt, I would be in a tie for the lead. In my head, I wasn't thinking about anything other than being in a tie for the lead. It wasn't about having a chance to win. When I made the putt for my 4th consecutive birdie, I was now tied with Louis for the lead at the Masters. On the 17th tee, I said to Teddy for the first time that entire day that we had a chance to win the Masters. He said, "I know, man." Then he shut up, so not as to jinx anything. The gravity of the moment finally hit us.
I really like that Teddy's decided to sort of just give it a little bit of a nod and a little bit of a wink as opposed to being, really overawed by the moment. Just, yeah, we do have a chance to win this. I would then encourage him to just be like, yep, nothing's changed. We just continue on the path that we're on. But as he says, the gravity of the moment had finally hit us. That's something that you've got to deal with as a player.
So on the 17th tee, I sliced my drive left into the trees. Walking off that tee, I said to Teddy that I might have ruined with that shot my second chance at winning a major. That memory was racing through my head. These are dangerous moments for a guy like me. As I walked down the 17th hole to my ball, "Don't even focus on that," Teddy told me. "Who knows what we might have got right now." When we got to the ball, it was one of the hardest shots I'd ever seen. The ball had rested on a moist piece of trampled down grass that the patrons had been walking over all week. I had 155 yards to the hole, and I needed to hit a gap wedge up over the trees with a muddy lie and somehow hit it farther than I'd ever hit it before. I gave it all I had. The shot ended up in the middle of the green. Now thoughts of winning were creeping into my head. Louis had hit a tree with his drive, leaving himself a long approach shot that ended up in the front bunker. But he played a beautiful shot to the green. We both made par and headed to the 18th hole tied for the lead.
I think the way that he describes that shot, 155 yards to the hole, hit a gap wedge over the tree, a muddy lie, hit it further than he's ever hit it before. That sounds very authentic. It sounds very much like he's at Tanglewood, giving himself some challenges around the golf course there. It actually sounds really authentic. I don't know whether other golfers would have just chipped this out or tried to, recover and hit a recovery shot. Don't make a mistake become another mistake. But I think this is really true to his performance, and I don't know whether he's conscious of that, whether he had the option to play sideways or play backwards or sort of punch it out forwards a little bit. I really like that. But what I'm also really liking here is that he's just enjoying the moment, as it seems. Louis put in the front bunker and then hit a really nice shot, and he's thinking, well, wow, we're going up the 18th all tied.
So, on the 18th, walking up to the tee, I said to Teddy, "I'm going to live and die by my driver. So I'm hitting driver here. No playing safe. We're going to go after it." I hit it right where I needed to, so I twirled my club, picked up my tee real fast. My heart was racing. It felt like the patrons might be able to see it pounding right through my shirt. Still, I was trying to look cool. Louis also hit a great drive. In the fairway, he hit his approach shot long and had a lengthy birdie putt. I hit my second shot to about 15 feet. It was a putt that I'd seen players make and win tournaments, but I missed it. Louis and I would leave the 18th green tied for the lead and headed for a sudden death playoff. As I walked through the corridor of what seemed like thousands of patrons to sign my scorecard, I tried to keep my head down and stay focused. Back again at the 18th hole for the second time in less than 30 minutes. I stuck to the plan that I had during regulation play. I would live and die by my driver. Louis and I again both hit perfect drive. At the green, his birdie putt narrowly missed falling into the hole, while my putt never had a chance. So then we headed to the 10th, which was a perfect hole for me, because I could slice it right to left in the shape of a dogleg. But my ball didn't cut, and I ended up right into the trees. My shoulders slumped as I stood aside Louis to hit his drive. My thoughts in that moment as I contemplated the difficulty of my next shot were that I might never have another shot at winning the Masters. I was beating myself up. Louis flared his drive and had more than 200 yards into the green. So as I passed his ball walking up the fairway, I was thinking that if somehow we could make par, we could make it to the next playoff hole. As I was approaching my ball, I noticed that the patrons had created a path in the shape of a hook shot that didn't have any tree trouble. I knew I had a shot. When I got to the ball, I knew instantly that this was a shot built for me. I had pulled off shots like this before. This was all in my head. Not even Teddy knew what I was thinking. I understood that many things could have gone wrong, but I was in a much better place than I was a few minutes earlier when my shoulders were slumped on the tee box. I had some time to consider my options. This was match play now, and what Louis did with his approach shot would influence my decision out of the woods. Louis' shot came up short, meaning he would have to pitch back up the hill over a hump into the green. It would be hard for him to stop the ball anywhere near the hole. I began thinking I could win with par. I had 134 yards to the front of the green and 164 to the pin. There was a helpful left to right wind. Teddy and I agreed that it was a perfect 52-degree gap wedge. We weren't sure that I could hit the club 164 yards, but we knew we weren't going to hit it 180. This is you, bro, he said as he backed away with the golf bag. He always told me that I was a painter and that he held my brushes. To hook the ball 40 yards, I set up with a closed stance and a closed club face. I rolled my hands and de-lofted the face through impact so that I could hit the ball lower. The shot also required a lot of club head speed. The patrons started moving in front to see me hit the shot. They were screaming so loud that I couldn't hear anything. Everything was happening so fast, I still hadn't seen where the ball ended up. I was looking at the front of the green and off to the side. Finally I asked Teddy, "Where is my ball?" "It's up by the hole," he said.
One thing that really stands out to me is this idea that he knows exactly what he wants to do, but his caddy doesn't necessarily have that insight. So he said that the shot exists in his head, and ultimately it's up to him to execute. And I really love this line from Teddy here. And I'm going to read it again. He says, "This is you, bro," he said as he backed away with the golf bag. "He'd always told me that I was the painter and that he just held the brushes." And I think ultimately that's what the caddy's doing here. He's providing support in the sense that he's literally humping the bag around the golf course, but support in the sense of, you can do this. This is you, bro. This is exactly what you do. This is what you've grown up doing, and you have the capabilities to do this. I'm sure that if he thought it was entirely the wrong shot and he didn't have the belief in it, he would have said that. But just that little 4-word sentence, "This is you, bro," that's going to instill a massive amount of confidence in Bubba for him to go out and do what he did.
Louis still had his chip, and we fully expected him to get up and down for par. His chip ran past the hole, and his par putt was outside of my birdie try. When he missed his par save, I had 2 putts to win the championship. I was cautiously optimistic that I could 2-putt from 10 feet, but something happened on the ladies' tour a week earlier that made me take even the shortest putts more seriously. IK Kim, one of the tour's top players, had missed a 14-inch putt on the 72nd hole of the Anna Inspirational and then lost in a playoff. I had watched her meltdown, and suddenly I started thinking about that. If you notice a theme here, my mind is often what gets in my way. I was so scared. I was trying to baby the putt and get the energy just right in my hands. I lagged it up to the hole to about 10 inches. The patrons began to cheer as I stood over the putt. I felt like I was about to start crying, but IK Kim kept popping into my head. Doug Sanders, the time he missed a 3-foot putt to win the British Open, also crept into my head. I motioned with one of my hands for everyone to calm down so that I could concentrate on this last putt. I told myself that I had not won. The world is focused on Bubba from Baghdad, the left-hander who never had a lesson. I didn't even have a routine, but I continued telling myself to go through my routine. I tried to do everything I would do over a putt as if it were the second hole of the first round.
Isn't it crazy that he's got a 10-inch putt to win a golf competition and literally the only thing in his way is his own mind?
Obviously, he does make the 10-inch putt, and at the press conference following the tournament, he said, "I never dreamed this far." What I meant by this is that, like all kids, I had dreamed of hitting a shot to win the Masters, but the dream always ended with that shot. Suddenly, I was living moments like the press conference that had never been part of the dream. Nobody knows what fame really looks or feels like until it happens to them. I've always awakened from my dreams, but I was trying to express to those reporters that somehow this one was still going. Sitting in front of the media from around the world, I realized that that dream was now complete. This was real life. I brought that jacket home and I stored it in the closet in our house in Orlando. When people would ask about it, I would tell them simply that it was in the closet. Truthfully, down deep, I didn't think that I deserved to be a Masters champion. I wasn't as good as some of these guys. They had gone to top-notch schools and grown up playing on great golf courses. In business, they call what I was feeling imposter syndrome. It would take a few years for me to grow comfortable wearing the green jacket. I was a Masters champion, but I still had much work to do, both professionally and personally, before I could hear my name mentioned among the many greats who have won that tournament without feeling queasy. Greg, something that stands out for me, How common is it for elite performers to experience imposter syndrome?
Well, I think imposter syndrome it's surprisingly common among elite performers, even those who don't necessarily reach the pinnacle of their fields or really the really, really high levels. But many high achievers feel like they don't deserve the success that they've got, or maybe they're not as capable as others perceive them to be, and maybe sometimes feel a little bit like a fraud, perhaps. So this can stem from a variety of factors, including the very high personal standards that they set for themselves, a little bit of a fear of failure, and the pressure to continually perform at a really exceptional level. So here are three things to think about. First one is normalize and seek social support. So acknowledge that imposter syndrome, it's common, and to be able to talk about these things with your trusted peers or your mentors and try and normalize this experience as much as possible. It is common and people have experienced it, so learn from them. But also celebrate and reflect on your own achievements. So acknowledging and celebrating what you have done, and in particular the hard work and the effort that got you there, that's going to help you build a more accurate perspective of your own ability. And finally, focus on your growth and a little bit of self-compassion here. So emphasize your personal growth over perfection. Don't let great be the enemy of good.
Three really great tips, Greg, and we're going to hear a little bit more about Bubba and how he was dealing with that 2012 Masters victory. And he says, as I slipped my right arm through the green jacket after winning the 2012 Masters, I had no idea just how differently the world would see me, how differently I would come to see myself, or how my life was about to change. Winning the Masters was about so much more than the green jacket, or the trophy, or the gobs of money I earned. You become a different person in the eye of the world, and if you're not careful, which I wasn't, in your own eyes. And obviously winning the Masters is incredibly lucrative, and he got many appearance fees and a lot of updated sponsorships because his contracts were set to expire, which was great timing on his part. But at the same time, there's a lot of internal struggles that he has. And in 2013, he's making cuts, but he's really not contending. So not really reaching the heights that you would expect of a Masters champion. And he says, my troubles were compounded by the fact that every morning at the first tee off of a tournament, I was introduced as your 2012 Masters champion, Bubba Watson. I was paired with the best players and featured on televised matches. It felt like every shot, every decision, every mistake I made was under the microscope. Since I had won the Masters, a part of me felt I was supposed to win all the time, even if I knew that thought process wasn't rational. As I continued to struggle, people began asking me why. Surely something had gone wrong. When this kind of downward spiral took hold, fear began to creep in. As usual, I found it all too easy to run towards the negative thoughts. Will I ever win another Masters? Will I ever win another tournament? Maybe I'm a one-hit wonder. The Masters was my last hurrah. There I was. I spent my developmental years playing with a chip on my shoulder, trying to prove to others that I belonged at the top of the game. And now, having proved it, I was already feeling pressure to prove that I wasn't a fluke. People had expectations of me now, and I didn't want to disappoint them. Not only was I turning against myself, but the return of my negative attitude was also making other people believe I was turning against them as well. How do you think athletes can develop strategies to maintain that self-belief and avoid this negative thinking, especially when they're under the spotlight?
I think it's important to recognize that spotlight and that he is now your 2012 Masters champion, Bubba Watson. And this really, for me, highlights the power of labels. He hasn't changed, but the label that he has changed. So instead of being Bubba from Baghdad, he's now the 2012 Masters champion, Bubba Watson. And I think trying to maybe get back in line with Bubba from Baghdad could be a good place to start. But here's some other things to consider, especially when athletes are under the spotlight, how they can, mitigate those pitfalls of negative thinking. I think first and foremost to focus on what we consider to be process-orientated goals, so the controllable aspects of performance like training and the effort that they put in rather than results. He's already looking forward to what is it that I need to do to prove I belong here, that hedonic treadmill that we've talked about in a number of previous episodes. I think maintaining a strong support system, so really relying and leaning his family, his friends, Teddy as his caddy, who's also a friend as well, for that stability and perhaps to provide a different angle or a different level of perspective.
So great reflection there, Greg. And 2013 was a definite struggle, and being able to embrace that title of being a Masters champion was something that Bubba certainly struggled with. But As 2014 rolls around, it seems like a different year for him, and he says, "What a difference a year can make. Professional golf takes an enormous amount of your physical, mental, and emotional energy to play. Lose your edge or get behind on your sleep, and you can fall behind the 8 ball pretty fast. Following the whirl and negativity of 2013, I decided to dedicate 2014 as the year of rejoicing, a time to compete hard and always try to improve, but also a time to appreciate my good fortune in life and in golf. I went into the 2014 Masters in a totally different state of mind than I was in 2012. I felt more relaxed and focused and less edgy than I had in 2012 and 2013. I wouldn't say that my intensity was any less, but it was a different kind of intensity, more positive. My goal was just to keep my head down and stay level, not too energized, not too excited, and not too upset if things happen to not go my way."
I love this. I'd like to get rid of 2014 as the year of rejoicing and just put like this as how to play good sport and how to enjoy what's going on. I think this is a great approach and a vastly underrated approach to sport performance. It's not about always being as switched on as humanly possible and wanting to run through a wall. It's about that balance of enjoying things, competing, always trying to improve, but just being you and recognizing and accepting things when they go well, when they go badly, and all of the different gamut that runs in between.
So into the Masters in 2014, he's going head to head with Jordan Spieth on Sunday. It was really between the two of them, and he says, "After some back and forth, he was still up by 2, walking off the 7th green. I remember telling myself, you've been in this situation before, and this back 9 is going to be hard. So hit a good tee shot on 8 and keep the pressure on. I knew the back 9 on Sunday was where the tournament would be decided, and if I could stay around the lead, then I'd have a shot." Spieth ended up losing the lead on the 8th hole, where I birdied and he 3-putted for a bogey. We were back to a tie. On the next hole, I birdied and Spieth bogeyed again, giving me a 2-shot lead. All of a sudden, I had a 2-shot lead going into the back 9, and I started talking to myself again. Actually, I was yelling at myself inside my own head. "Okay, don't worry about what anyone's doing. This is hard. This kid doesn't understand the back 9, the energy level of the back 9. Spieth, who I have enormous respect for, had become the kid to me. I was trying to figure out ways to pump myself up. This is going to be the most stressful thing he's ever done. And he's a lot younger than I was when I won for the first time." Greg, he's thinking a lot about Jordan Spieth here.
He is, but I think he's thinking about it in the right way. That he doesn't necessarily know what's coming, that he hasn't prepared for the energy level that's going to be needed to be successful on the back 9. Ultimately, he's thinking about him in the sense of, I have the experience that this kid doesn't necessarily have. And I really like that. And I think really what that's helping him to do is to focus on his strengths, on his positives here. I've been here. I know what it takes to win on this. This is suiting me perfectly. And he's going to, kind of push on from there. So I don't mind this one focusing on his opponent for just a moment or two, but then bringing it back to him.
As we were walking from the 11th hole to the 12th hole, the crowd was getting louder and louder, and all I could think was, keep your head down and focus. On the 15th, still 3 strokes ahead of Spieth and Blix, I drove the ball behind the trees and into some rough. Even though I had a 3-shot lead, the last thing I wanted to do was go into some kind of prevent defense. My mind was racing as I told Teddy, I think it's a perfect 6-iron if I hit a bullet. It needs to go under the limbs of a tree and then fly over the water. It probably won't stop on the green, but that's not the goal. We can make par with a 6-iron, right? I asked Teddy. Right, I guarantee you, par, said the wise one. I later learned that the TV commentators and perhaps 90% of the people watching the tournament thought I was nuts trying to hit that shot. In their eyes, I was putting myself at risk with an unnecessarily aggressive shot. Teddy and I have talked about that shot and agree that neither of us felt a hint of doubt about whether we could get the ball over the green. We couldn't have cared less about getting birdie. All we needed was par. If my opponents managed birdie on the hole, we'd have given them a stroke and make it up somewhere else. My ball landed in the fringe and shot over the green, which wasn't a surprise. While it left a difficult chip shot, being over the green in 2 on a par 5 left me with a relatively easy par. Nobody made birdie, so I did my job. We did everything we wanted to do. In my mind, that hole will go down as one of our best executed moments. Greg, expertise is often about knowing what to ignore and getting to the heart of the problem. And they do this fantastically well here.
This is real synergy between him and Teddy, and having a clear understanding of Bubba's capabilities as a golfer, which are obviously incredibly high, knowing that he's got this shot in his bag, that they were able to think through, here, what do we need? We don't need a birdie here. We just need a par to be able to keep things ticking along. And what this really shows to me is the ability to commit to a plan once you have a clear plan in your mind.
At the par 4 18th hole, I pulled my forward, which I designed especially for the 18th hole at Augusta. My confidence was soaring. I had to make a 5 and the other guys had to make a 2 to stay in it. Our goal wasn't to knock it a mile, but to keep it in play, and that's exactly what I did. I hit it right down the middle. I couldn't have asked for a better shot. Then I hit a 9-iron onto the green. I've always had the dream of walking up the 18th fairway knowing I was going to win and high-fiving everyone before sinking my putt. I told this to Teddy while we were getting ready to walk to the 18th green. Despite my best efforts to keep myself under control, as I approached the final green, my mind was beginning to spin as I felt the moment of victory approaching. After Spieth missed his first putt, he finished out, letting me take the spotlight. I don't even remember making the final putt. I couldn't see straight, and I had to ask Teddy to read the line to the hole for me. I was acting as though I'd never putted in my whole life. After I'd won the Masters in 2012, I sort of hid the jacket in my closet. I didn't want to appear in public with it or have lots of people pouring at it. The reason for this was that I'd put the tournament on such a high pedestal I couldn't really enjoy it as much as I might have wanted to. I wanted to show the people who put the tournament together that I understood and respected what the Masters signified to golfers everywhere. And of course, there was a little part of me that felt unworthy of the jacket, and just maybe it had been a fluke. The difference between 2012 and 2014 was that I was no longer dumb and innocent, trying to do everything and pretending to be Superman. As for my own obligations to sponsors and others who wanted to pay me boatloads of money, I learned how to say no. I was still getting paid, make no mistake about that, but I did it more on my terms. Being a one-time Masters champion is one thing, but when you've won 2 times within 3 years, you earn more flexibility to say, no, I don't think I can do that today. So Greg, how can performers find the balance between fulfilling obligations and then also maintaining this kind of personal integrity and potentially prioritizing things?
That's a great question, and I do want to remind potential sponsors that if they want to throw boatloads of cash at us, and that is a quote, boatloads of money, that we will be more than willing to accept it. We've done lots of things in the past for no money, and we'll certainly do other things for money. But performers can find a balance between fulfilling the objectives that they got and the obligations that they have, and maintaining the personal integrity and priorities after a major success, really by what I said earlier, setting clear boundaries, but more importantly, learning to say no when it's necessary. They should prioritize their commitments that align with their values and their long-term goals, and that helps them to stay true to themselves. So additionally, leveraging their success to help other people can also provide a sense of purpose and fulfillment, allowing them to manage their newfound responsibilities while maintaining that personal integrity that is in line with their values.
So after the 2014 Masters, he definitely handled having that green jacket better the second time, but he talks quite openly that the arrogance and some of the way he acted after the 2014 Masters really wasn't the way he wanted to behave. And he says in 2016, that year, I was in a process of making a concerted effort to open up, share more about me than I had previously been comfortable sharing, and hopefully change my image with the general public. In the spring before the Ryder Cup, I even did an interview with 60 Minutes in which I talked about my fears of crowds and flying. I told him I have panic attacks that are so bad I think I'm having a heart attack. Making shots and putts are easy, I said. It's the mental part of the game where I tend to fall down. I was working on it like my life depended on becoming a better person, which was true. With help from Jesus Christ and my family and closest friends, I knew I could progress and become a better person, just as surely as I'd known I would become a better golfer back in my younger days. So Greg, in 2016, he'd won on tour. He was 9th in Ryder Cup points. He was the 7th ranked player in the world and a 2-time major winner. but he didn't get the captain's pick for the Ryder Cup, and it's safe to say that no player with that record, while he was also in his prime, has ever been passed up for a captain's pick. And he reflects on this and he says, I was hurt and baffled by the decision, but after my initial disappointment, I had an epiphany. Rather than pout, I told myself I would try to use the Ryder Cup as an opportunity to show the world who I really was. I respected the heck out of Davis and refused to allow any bitterness to define our relationship or my relationship with other golfers or to the sport I loved. A lot of people didn't know who I was. They didn't know that I was a man of faith and I loved representing my country. They also didn't know something else, that I loved opportunities to be of service to other people, including other golfers, because doing so would allow me to feel part of something bigger than myself. So Gregor's context, even though he really feels like he should be picked, he has to be the assistant coach on the Ryder Cup team, and he does play a significant role on that team as the assistant, and the US win.
Duncan, I think we're actually seeing shades of UGA here when the coach didn't pick him to be part of the team because of the kind of the glue that he had within that team and the camaraderie and the sort of the, what would you call it, intangibles it often gets referred to within teams. Despite Bubba being arguably the best golfer on that team, you mentioned his record there and the fact that no one with that record has ever been passed up as a captain's pick. And I think the experience that he's had at UGA and the experience that he's currently having here, I think it seems like he's able to unpack this in a little bit more of a mature way than he was at the time during UGA.
And he does have a significant impact, and the US win 17-11 at Hazeltine in Minnesota. I wish I could say that after the 2016 Ryder Cup, I never stressed out again and never let my emotions get the better of me on the golf course. I wish I could say I've never complained to an official about a rule, lost my cool with a fan who was snapping pictures of me while I'm addressing the ball, or let slip to a reporter that I wasn't crazy about the conditions of a golf course where I just stunk the place up. But none of it's true. Still, I'm getting better with time, and crazy as it sounds, I think that the struggles I've had with the mental side of the game have made me a better coach, and dare I say, captain. Empathy is an essential ingredient to successful coaching. Davis showed it by welcoming me into the team, and it's something I very much hope to continue paying forward in the years to come. And Greg, that is where we'll leave it today. But as always, success leaves clues. So what are your top 10 life lessons from Up and Down by Bubba Watson?
Number one, embrace your unique style. Embracing and developing your unique style can lead to extraordinary success. Bubba says his parents would allow and even encourage me to do things differently simply for the sake of having my own way or to stand out from the rest of the kids. Number two, persist through challenges. Use obstacles as motivation to drive your success. Number three, stay grounded and humble. Stay humble and appreciate every opportunity. He says, I've tried to appreciate each and every one of the amazing opportunities that a life playing golf has given me. Number four, be adaptable and open to change. Embrace change and be open to new experiences. He says, the process of self-discovery was ideal for my learning style. It turbocharged my development. Number five, seek support and guidance. Surround yourself with positive people who support you and believe in you. Joe told my dad that he thought I had a gift and that the last thing I needed was someone trying to tell me how to play. Number six, learn from your mistakes. Accept your mistakes and learn from them to improve. He says, every decision is ultimately on the player. No one made me hit a 9-iron. I knew it then and I know it now. Number seven, value relationships. Building and maintaining relationships are keys to success. Those relationships are like marriages. You have to maintain them. Number eight, stay resilient and focused. Maintaining resilience and focus, even during the tough times, is the key to success. He says, I just knew that the first deal provided much needed short-term fix because, as a ping professional, I was able to get money that helped cover my entry fees and hotel bills. Number nine, maintain integrity and honesty. Always stay true to your values and be honest. He says, the only thing a poor man has is his word, never lie. Number 10, balance your personal and professional life. Ensure a balance between your professional aspirations and personal life.
Another fantastic top 10, Greg. As always, we can learn from the things to avoid on our performers' journeys. So what are your top 10 lessons to avoid from Up and Down by Bubba Watson?
Number one, being overconfident. Overconfidence can lead to negative consequences. He says, I let that go to my head and I'm painfully aware at times that I was difficult to be around. Number 2, neglecting emotional and mental health. Ignoring mental and emotional well-being can lead to severe issues. He says, I was not equipped mentally or emotionally for living my dream in the public eye. Number 3, avoiding constructive criticism. Failing to accept constructive criticism can hinder personal growth. He says, Teddy thought I was losing my mind. He was struck by how I could act like a psycho on the golf course. Number 4, not resolving conflicts. Unresolved conflicts can damage relationships. He said, our whole team played in 2 tournaments and I placed second in both. But there is more to being on the team than just playing good golf. Number 5, suppressing your emotions. Bottling up emotions can lead to unhealthy outbursts. He says, when something went wrong, I could have a nasty eruption. Number 6, relying solely on external validation. Depending only on external validation can be detrimental. He said, living your life in the public eye is difficult at best. Number 7, ignoring the importance of balance. Focusing exclusively on your career can lead to personal dissatisfaction. He said, I started adjusting my schedule so I could make a few of those long trips overseas. Number 8, letting success lead to complacency. Continuous improvement is necessary even after achieving success. Bubba says, in 2013 I entered 21 tournaments and made 18 cuts, 2 more than in the previous year. The problem was that I couldn't manage to finish tournaments among the top few. Number 9, allowing negative feedback to define you. Letting negative feedback affect your self-worth can undermine your confidence. He says, I was letting my position on the money list, world rankings, and Ryder Cup and President Cup standings eat at my soul. And finally, number 10, neglecting the importance of discipline. Lack of discipline can lead to missed opportunities and underperformance. He says, if I was going to tell kids that getting their education was important, I'd better complete my own education at the University of Georgia. Thank you so much for joining myself and Duncan on this episode. If you enjoyed it as we did, we just ask one thing. Share this episode with 2 people in your network. And for that, we are truly grateful. See you next time on Performers.